This next video is called Tea Time with God. I feel like the Lord told me to share my own personal experiences of what it's like to have tea time with God and the real life situations that He spoke to me about for my own life.
So Angel, can you tell us about this tea time with God? I keep getting this image of you and God sitting and you actually sipping tea. Is that the case?
I wish that I could sip some tea with God. That would be interesting. So tea time with God was something that an apostle said to me in a prophecy early last year. He said that God says that He wants more tea time with Him. And I love that, and I understood because I knew that God was calling me to be in His presence more and spend time. So tea time with God is really just the same thing you would do with your friends, being able to sit with them, getting to know them, talking about what's been going on. And that's what I do. I try to have tea time with God. I actually try to do that every morning and every night. So when I say tea time with God, that's really all it is being in God's presence and just finding out what He wants to say and even changing me and just whatever He's trying to do within.
Okay, so during this intimate tea time with God, what are some things that He has talked to you about or said to you?
God says a lot to me in tea time, which is why it's so much fun and so revealing. So during these times, we might be talking about anything, actually. A lot of times it'll just be direction for me. So because this I'm So Fly movement is so new, I am always asking God, what's next? What does this next episode look like? Even to do this filming today was a lot of tea time with God so that I can find out, God, what do you want? What does it look like? What questions are we addressing? And I felt like the Lord gave me this direction for this during a tea time. He's also been dealing with me a lot about what this movement is about, what He wants to see come from this, and sharing with me what He plans to do. And it's just really exciting to, one, know that God is speaking to you about something, but two, that you're able to be a part of something that He is doing that is so major, like this movement.
Wow. You obviously spend a lot of time and you get a lot of direction. God is ordering a lot of the steps that's going on, especially with this movement.
Right.
But a lot of people have a hard time believing that you can actually hear from God or that anybody can hear from God.
Yes.
It's just hard for them to grasp that God actually speaks.
Mm-hmm.
How did you learn to hear from God, and how do you know when He is speaking to you?
I love that you said that, because for me, it's never really been an issue of whether or not you can hear God, a person can hear God. So I'm surprised at finding out how many people, and even Christians, that do not believe that they can hear God, that God would speak to them personally. So it's not something that I grew up thinking that wasn't possible. I always felt like it was, but understanding that I could learn to hear God was the difference in what happened in my life when I came back to the Lord. So I attend Covenant Life Church, which is a church that is a part of and affiliated with Christian International. And the thing that they really teach is how to hear God. So when I started going to that church, they have this thing that they do on Friday nights called Activation, and they do Friday night School of the Holy Spirit. So I began to go there on Friday nights, and I would just practice the way that they do. They allow you to partner up with someone, and you basically pray and see what you feel like the Lord said to you. So it was a lot of that. And definitely in those times, I didn't feel like I could hear God. You would see other people get up and just give 10-minute prophecies, which are basically moments that you're hearing God and you're giving it to that person. And it would be intimidating to see that. I would think, there's no way I'm going to be able to hear God in that manner on the spot like that and give it to someone. But the Lord showed me that it was really a faith walk. You have to first believe that you can hear God, And it was a lot of practice, a lot of believing that you can, and just stepping out there and really doing it. One of the things that I think is that people need to understand that there are always an option of 3 voices that you can hear. It's always your voice in your head, or it will be God, or it could be the devil. And what people don't understand is that God sounds just like you. He is basically like your conscience. So you know that when you feel something in your conscience saying, hey, do not do this, or you should go do this, it just sounds like yourself. And that's exactly how God sounds. A lot of times the Lord will speak randomly. A lot of times I will be working or driving and I will hear to pray for someone, or someone comes to mind and you feel like I should pray for them. That would be the Lord speaking. He doesn't speak to you necessarily in an audible voice or come booming out of the sky the way a movie might make it seem. It's really just an unction on the inside, or just a thought that really just sounds like your own thought. So I feel like people need to first understand what God sounds like. And a lot of times you'll know that it wasn't you. I wasn't necessarily thinking about a certain person, or that they might even need prayer. And then it comes to me, and I know that's not the devil, because he doesn't want me to pray for anyone. I know that it's not me because I'm not thinking about that person. And in that case, I deduce that it must be God. And you start to learn how to do that. And the more that you practice doing that, the quicker you'll recognize when it is the Lord speaking. Another thing that my brother Duval had told me, because he knew how to do this quicker than I did, he said to me, Angel, journal. So I would get in my prayer time with the Lord, and I would get a notebook or my computer, and I would just sit down and I'd say, God, what do you want to say to me today? I would talk about anything I wanted to talk about, and then I would just write whatever I felt like I heard. And of course, initially I felt silly because I thought, these are all my thoughts. I'm just writing down my thoughts. What's the point of this? But the more that I wrote, the more that I'd go back and realize that those were not my thoughts. They would be encouraging me about something, and I know that I'm very hard on myself. I don't tend to encourage myself or say, hey, Angel, you did this well. I'm always thinking about how can I do it better. I would then realize that was the Lord speaking to me. So it would become encouraging, and then I would continue to do it. So I encourage anyone that's first trying to understand how to hear God. I think that's one of the better ways. It doesn't put you on the spot with other people, or you don't have to give someone what you think God's saying. You can just practice with yourself. So I encourage journaling to be a way of doing that.
Wow, something that you said several times and that really stuck out to me was the word practice.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it comes to Christians and even non-believers, we don't think that in this way of life you have to practice.
That's true.
You have to be intimate with God. You have to take time. You have to make small steps. You have to learn the way.
Yes.
And it's very important that you bring that out, that it is about practicing and growing stronger in God to get that connection to hear Him, definitely.
I love that you said that, because when I first came to the Lord and started to understand how to hear God, I didn't think that you could practice hearing God. I grew up in a Pentecostal background, and that's not really what you're taught about hearing God. So that's a good point that you brought out. You actually can practice. It's just like anything else in the secular world. We practice to become better at something. You can practice actually to hear God. And it's a lot of just having faith and just believing that He will speak, and believing that He will speak to you. And I also just want to add to that, I feel like the Lord is prompting me even to say that it has a lot to do with how you're living also. The Bible speaks about in Isaiah 59 that our own sin can separate God from hearing us. So if you're living any type of life and not really considering God, when you know that He's spoken to you about something, it becomes harder to hear Him. When you're living more of a life of what God is asking you to do, it becomes easier to hear Him. So that's another thing that I think people should understand about that.
Wow, so hearing, I believe that you've heard some great and wonderful things, but can you tell us about a very significant time that God spoke to you and it had a huge impact on your life?
So when I first came back to the Lord, before I came back to the Lord, my mother used to always encourage me to go back to school. I had a bachelor's degree at that time, and as an adult, I just was done. I didn't want to go back to school. I felt like I had done enough. And it's funny for me to even think about and say that now, because now I'm a couple master's degrees later. So to even think that I didn't want to do that earlier is funny to me. But she kept saying, Angel, go back to school and get your master's degree. And I was like, no, I don't want to go back to school. As soon as I gave my life back to the Lord and accepted Him again, the first thing He said to me was go back to school. And I knew it was God, because I did not want to go back to school. And so I signed up and went back to school that day. And I knew it was about bettering my future. So right after that, I started to speak to the Lord about getting another job. And I had went to school for my master's degree in accounting. And so I wanted to go pursue an accounting position. And I thought, well, God, how do I find another job that they will pick me up with no experience really in accounting? Even with a degree, you still need experience. So the Lord gave me a dream one night, and in the dream, I was sitting at a desk, and there were papers just all scattered about. It was just like really unorganized and a messy desk. But I could see one sheet of paper that said 85K in bold black print. And I knew that the Lord was speaking to me about a salary, and that was a salary that he had for me. Nothing else happened in the dream. The Lord did not say anything. But when I woke up, I knew that was the meaning of the dream. And I encourage you to always write down your dreams when you get one and you know that it's not what we call a pizza dream, just like some random dream. I knew it was from God. So around that time, I kept saying, okay, God, if you're showing me that you have this salary for me, how do I pursue this job? And I kept thinking in my mind, I need to go somewhere else. But I felt like the Lord did not want me to leave the current position I was in. But it didn't make sense how I would arrive at a higher salary because there was no other position that I could have escalated to except an executive director position, which I didn't want and didn't feel was for me. So right around that time, we were currently outsourcing the accounting job and role there. But something had occurred that the executive director wanted to bring in a financial position. And the Lord said to me, tell him that you'll do it. And I thought, really, God? You know, how do we even do that? They've never had a financial position in that organization. Are you telling me that they're just going to create this thing now for me, you know? So it took me a long time to convince myself that I could go tell him that. I set out, I wrote conversations, counter responses to what he might say and everything. And finally one day the Lord said, today is the day that you're going to tell him that. So I was so nervous that morning. And I said, okay, God, I'm going to do this. So I went into his office that morning and the executive director wasn't there. And I thought, whew, I don't have to do this today. But I felt like, no, the Lord wanted me to do that day. So I saw when he returned from lunch, I could see out of the window, I saw his car come back in. And I had said to the Lord, God, if this is the day you want me to speak to him, you'll have him call me into his office, because he never called me into his office, really. If he had something to say, he would just come see me where I was sitting at my desk. As soon as he returns from lunch, he goes into his office and he calls my name out. And I thought, okay, Lord, this is a sign from you. And then I went in there, I presented my argument. I told him that I wanted to do it. If he would allow me to, I told him what salary I wanted. He was actually really pleased and content with the idea of keeping it in-house and it being me, because I was already doing some of the accounting role. And it turned out that within 6 to 8 weeks, I was making $85,000. And it was just a miracle of the Lord to even see that entire path be walked out from the dream from God saying, hey, I want you to tell him that you'll do this. But that's how God works. When you build that relationship with the Lord and you have tea time with God, there's a relationship that forms and you learn how to hear him and you learn how he operates in your life. And I think about how I could have gone to another job somewhere else, but I'm sure that I would not have escalated to the salary that God wanted for me in the time that I did, nor would I have been content. So it's very important to have the kind of relationship that you're listening and you're aware of what God wants for you. Yeah.
Wow. So something very interesting there that you said was dreams. You know, sometimes we don't realize that God can speak to us through dreams. That's another form of communication.
That's right.
And we have these dreams and sometimes we're like, did I eat something bad? Like, what was up with that? Like, that was the craziest dream. But it's amazing how God gives us those little inside scoops of what's going to happen.
Yes.
Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes we're completely blind and we're just walking and he's guiding each step. But sometimes he reveals to us his plan. And it's just so amazing when we're able to walk into that plan. It takes faith that he opens it up and we can walk into that.
Yes.
It's such a blessing. You know, it's not just God speaking to you, but it's also you speaking to God. It's that communication back and forth. What other real life concerns have you spoken to God about?
So one of the things that I told the Lord when I came back to him and gave my life to him, I said, God, I don't want to do anything without you. I don't want to make any major decisions. Of course, all of my decisions have not been right. And of course, I've not been obedient to everything the Lord has said. But I've always felt like major things in your life, you want to make sure you include the Lord. So I knew that God wanted me to start my own business. So I have an accounting and business management business. And I knew the Lord wanted me to do that. And I said, God, I don't want to come up with this name myself. What do I call this business? A lot of people will use their own name, and I could have called it Angel Reynolds Consulting, but I was like, God, I don't want to include my own name in this. So one day I was driving to work and I heard Financially Sane Services. I heard it so plain and so clear, and I said, Financially Sane Services. I said it out loud thinking, I need to hear what this sounds like aloud. And then I said it again. I said, Financially Sane Services. And I was like, thank you, Lord. I like that. And I knew that he wanted me to call the business that. And that's what it's been called. And while, when you hear something like that, you're like, where did that come from? I knew it didn't come from me because I wouldn't have even thought to put those words together. I don't feel like I'm really creative in that way. And every client that I said that to after that, that was the first thing that they commented on. They said something to me about, I love your business name. And some would say, where did it come from? And then I'd say, well, actually, I was praying about it and I felt like the Lord gave me that. And it's funny with the responses that you might get from that. But I don't hesitate to tell people that's where it come from because I can't take the credit for that. But that is definitely a time that I was like, Lord, I need your help. And he came through.
Wow. You've talked about some major things in your life that God has spoken to you about. But I want to know about the day-to-day. Does God ever speak to you about minor things or just those things that you see daily in your life?
Yes, he does. God cares about everything. We always think that the Lord only cares about those major things that are so out there. But God speaks to me about minor things. And the closer that you are with him, the quicker you will be able to hear him about even the minor things. So before I released the book, I'm So Fly, I kept feeling like the Lord wanted me to take my hair color back to black. And what's funny about that is I'm a person that changes my hair color a lot. I might change it every season. But I kept feeling prompted to take your hair back to black. And I thought, I had just gone through this entire process from basically spring to summer of trying to lift my ends to the blonde that I wanted. And I had just done that in a 4-step process. It took me 6 to 8 weeks to get it to the color that I wanted. And now, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, I'm hearing God say, take your hair back black. So I'm just like, Angel, is that you? Is that really God? I pondered over it a lot, but I said, it's not me because I just changed my hair color. I just wanted to change it, but I still kept feeling prompted to change it back black. And while I don't know why the Lord wanted me to do that, of course I did it because I believe in being obedient. And I also know that the Lord has spoken to me about this movement. He told me that everything about it would be strategic. And while I don't understand why he wanted my hair black, I believe that it's part of the strategic plan. And I just choose to understand that God's smarter and wiser than me. So it doesn't matter if I don't get it sometimes. Just do what God says to do, because then it'll make sense later and you'll understand later. So that's definitely one of those day-to-day things God spoke to me about. Another one is fasting. The Lord speaks to me a lot about fasting. I'm a firm believer in fasting. I think it is a great way to position yourself to be able to hear God better, to also deny your flesh a bit more. So recently the Lord spoke to me about fasting. Just a couple weeks ago, I was fasting, not having anything to drink except water. And when God said that to me, I said, God, not coffee, because I'm a coffee drinker in the mornings. And I heard the Lord say tea. That was the compromise. I wasn't really happy about that, but that's what he said to me. And then when I was in prayer, maybe 2 or 3 days ago, the Lord said, I want you to fast every week, Monday through Friday. So this past week, he said to me, the TV from 6 to 6. And even with that, I thought, the TV not all day, because normally if I fast TV, I will fast it for the entire day. But the Lord was specifically said 6 to 6, which I thought was interesting, and I'm kind of surprised. Maybe he was giving me some slack. But it's that type of thing that he speaks to me about, and I'll be in prayer this week to find out what he wants me to fast in this coming week.
Wow. So I want to ask you, sometimes we don't really want to hear what God has to say because it may be something that's directing us in a way that we're not ready to go in.
That's true.
So my question is, have you ever heard from God when you weren't asking him a question?
Yes, I have. A lot of times you hear from God when your attitude is bad, or when you want to say something because someone's angered you, and the Lord will check you about it. So definitely he speaks in those times. I also can remember a time when I had been praying about my knees. So as an adult, I became a runner somewhere along the way. My dad always instilled in us that we needed to exercise. You only get one body, take care of it. And while he likes the gym and he's more of a bodybuilder, I never really liked like lifting weights and that type of thing. So I was asking God, like, what's the exercise for me? I started to run, never knowing that that would be something that I would actually like. And I was running about 20 miles a week, and it was really bothering my knees. So even as a kid, I always dealt with like an issue with my right knee feeling weak. And because of the running that I was doing, both knees would begin to hurt. So I said, Lord, you know I don't like to work out in the gym. I have done well by even picking up running. You know, please let me continue to run. I need you to heal my knees. So I just felt like the Lord said, well, you need to start believing for that. So I would just say every day, knees, you are healed. I didn't really believe it, but I knew the power of my words, and I said it anyway. And I said, knees, you are healed. And I kept saying that. And even while I was running, I would say that, but they were still hurting. So I remember one day I was running, and I remember exactly where I was at. I was almost done. I had run about 5 or 6 miles that day. And all of a sudden I heard, how do your knees feel? And it stopped me in my tracks. And I bent over and I grabbed my knees, and I was like, oh my God, my knees do not hurt. And it was almost like I felt the Lord laugh at me, because it came at such a shock, and it was so from nowhere. It was so random that the Lord would say that to me. And then I realized that my knees didn't hurt the day before. They didn't hurt the day before that. And I thought, at what point did they even stop hurting? And just like that, my knees were healed. And I've run since then. And this is before I started doing half marathons. And I've never had another issue with my knee. And it was even like that with my back. The Lord did the same thing. I had back issues from car accidents. And it would hurt when I would like be in the car riding for a long period of time. And I would just say back, you're healed. Not really believing it necessarily, but telling myself that you have power in your words. You need to start saying that. And then just like that, the Lord healed it. So what did you guys think? Did any of the things that we talked about make sense to you? If not, please feel free to drop your questions below. I am sure that some of what we spoke about was new to you, or you might have questions about it. I will be sure to get back to you. You can also find my email address in the About section of this channel, and I can't wait to hear from you guys.